Hello cyberspace, my name is Garrett and welcome to episode 6 in my Minecraft 1.7.10 modding tutorial. In this episode we're going to take a look at more advanced block and item creation mechanics, specifically multi-sided textures and metadata for both blocks and items, and we're going to walk through creating the textures and the coding mechanics behind those. If you haven't, I recommend starting at the beginning of this series so that you build up the foundation for everything we've done thus far. You can do that by clicking the eye in the top right hand corner. But if you've done all that, let's go ahead and get started. Alright, so we've got Eclipse open to our mod folder, but since we're taking a look at multi-sided textures, the first thing that we're going to need to do is actually create the textures. And because they're multi-sided textures, we're going to need 6 different textures. So we're going to go ahead and open up our image editor. Paint.net if you're on Windows, Penta if you're on Linux. They have Paint.net for Mac or just any editor that supports transparency. Now we're going to create a new image, 16 by 16, with a transparent background. Zoom in just a little bit. And there we go. So basically what we want to do is just kind of create textures so that we can tell which side is which. So I'm going to fill this one in, and then maybe we'll just write what side it is. So Minecraft assigns a number to each side of a block, and that side of a block corresponds to which cardinal direction it faces. And they are assigned the numbers 0 through 5 for the 6 faces of a block, 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and they correspond to the different sides. So we're going to create each individual texture, 0 through 5. So, for example, we'll start with 0. 0 is the bottom face. So maybe I just write, that was horrible. I forget that there's not a lot of pixels. Make a B for bottom. So now we need to save the texture. So we're going to hit save, make sure it's set to PNG, and then in our assets, mod ID, textures, blocks folder, we're going to put in what our unlocalized name is going to be. So say tutorial sided block, and then underscore, and then the number that corresponds to that face. So since 0 is the bottom, we'll put a 0, and we're going to save it there. And what we're going to do is we're just going to repeat that process for each of the different sides. 0 corresponding to the bottom face, 1 is the top face, 2 is the northern face, 3 is the southern face, 4 is the western face, and 5 is the eastern face. So we're just going to repeat that process for each of the faces, of course just saving it using tutorial sided block underscore and then the corresponding number for that texture. So I'm just going to create the textures real quick. Alright, there we go. So I've got all 6 different textures with their corresponding directions saved in the assets package. So if we refresh source main resources, assets.tootmod textures blocks, in here we see we have tutorial sided block 0 through 5. So the next thing that we're going to want to do is going to feel pretty familiar. We're going to create a class for our block. So if you remember in our tutorial block class, we just had some basic attributes set. Well, we're going to do the same thing. We're just going to create a another class for our sided block. So we're going to hit new class, tutorial sided block. It's going to create that, and then we want to extend block. Control-Shift-O to import, net Minecraft block, save it, and then we need to create the constructor for the material. And then we can just steal some of these modifiers from our last block. So that's going to set the name, the name, the texture name, the creative tab, just throw it in MISC tabs for now, the hardness, light level, harvest level, resistance, and step sound. So there's our basic block class. Now if we were to do this, it would look just like any other block. It would go and find one texture and tile it on the other sides. What comes next is we have to actually tell it that it needs to have 6 different textures, one on each different side. So to do that, we're going to create a variable to store each of the different textures in, and Minecraft refers to these as icons. So we're going to create a new variable, public icon, then some square brackets to show that it's an array, then textures equals new icon, square brackets, and in here we're going to put a 6. Tell Minecraft that we're going to have 6 items. Control-Shift-O to import the icon interface. Now the icon interface holds information telling Minecraft where these icons are located. These texture sides are located in the texture map once it creates the texture map during the pre-init stage. So what we're going to do is we're going to customize the method by which Minecraft registers those sides, the different sides, and tell it that it needs to do it for all 6 of these sides. So we're going to have another method in here. It's going to be public void. Then the name of the method is register block icons, and it takes argument icon register reg. And we want to import icon register. And if you just want to make a little note, this function, you see this green arrow here in Eclipse, what that means is that this function is going to override a parent function. So in the block class, I don't know if I can jump to it here or not. Yeah. In the block class, there's a function called register block icons. Right here. And then this register block icons is defined in the block class. This.block icon equals register icon, blah, 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 this.texture name. So what we're doing is we're overriding that. We're telling Forge, we're telling Minecraft, don't go look in the block class for this method, use this one, because we want to register our own custom set of icons. So what we need to do in here is we're going to need to have an iterating loop. So this is just a for loop that repeats 6 times for each of the different textures. So the way the syntax for this in Java is done, you're going to have a for loop and then open parentheses, then we're going to define a counting integer. So int count equals 0. We want it to start at 0, so we're going to define a counter. That counter is going to begin at 0. Then we're going to define the condition. We want count to be less than 6, and then we're going to define the action. We're going to add 1 to count every time this block in here repeats. So basically what this tells Java is every time count is less than 6, you're going to repeat what's in here. And then when you finish repeating it once, increment count by 1. So basically whatever we put inside this for loop is going to repeat 6 times. So what do we need to do? Well, we need to register the icons, these texture sides, in our icons array. So we're going to do this dot textures for side I equals reg dot register icon. This is a method inside the icon register class, and then we need to get the texture name. So this dot texture name, if you remember, we set it up here. It's going to look for whatever block. So in this case it'll be tutorial sided block. It's going to go look for the tutorial sided block file, but we don't want it to just look for one file. We need it to look for all 6 of these. So we're going to concatenate the underscore and then the integer I. So I is going to repeat for 0 through 5. Not I, my bad. Count. Count is going to repeat 0 through 5. And so for each of those 5, 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, we're going to go and set, so textures slot 0. Well, we're going to go find the texture tutorial sided block underscore 0. So it's going to come find this texture, and it's going to register it in our array, our interface of textures. And it's going to register it with the icon register, which is actually in Minecraft what injects textures into the texture maps. The way Minecraft manages textures is there's one great big map, and all the textures are just stitched together on that great big map. And then when it needs to find a texture for a block or an item, Minecraft will go and look in the icon register interface right here, and it will ask it, okay, where is this texture located? And it'll say like, oh, it's located at 2048 512. And so it'll go to pixel 2048 512, and it'll look in a 512 by 512 radius for that texture, and it'll pull it from the texture map there. So what we're doing is we're telling Minecraft, instead of just registering one texture for this block on that map, register all 6. So we've got our textures actually registered in the game, but Minecraft still doesn't know that it's looking for 6 different textures for this block. So we've written the function that overrides the parent function and registers all 6 of our textures. So now we need to override one more function to tell Minecraft to actually use 6 different textures on this block, and that's the getIcon method. And that method is what is called by Minecraft when it's looking for a texture for a given side. So this is public, it returns an icon interface, and it's named getIcon. Takes 2 arguments, int side and int meta, and then the metadata variable is something that we will get back to later. But the only thing we need to do in here is return the specific texture that is specific to the side. So we're going to return this dot textures, and then we need to specify what side. And so that is what it's going to do, is it's going to look through, and Minecraft's going to say, I need the texture for side 3. And so it's going to call getIcon with the first argument being 3. And so what we're going to do is we're going to look in this textures array of icons that we registered, and we're going to find side 3, and Minecraft's going to return that side. And so that way it'll wind up on whatever side of our block. So the last thing we need to do is jump over to our tutorial, our TutMod blocks class, and just register it like any other block. So public static tutorial sided block tutorial sided block. And down here we need to define it. Tutorial sided block equals new tutorial sided block. Takes 2 materials, or it takes 2 arguments, the material and the name, tutorial sided block. And then we just register it with the game registry. Game registry dot register block, tutorial sided block, tutorial sided block dot get unlocalized name. Then the last thing that we can do if we're feeling ambitious is head over to our lang file and just name it something a little more human friendly. Tile.tutorial sided block.name sided texture block. So now that we've got all that done, we can test it out by running the game. Alright, so I jump into my creative superflat world here just for testing. And if we look in the miscellaneous tab, there we go. There's our sided texture block. If we place it down, up just a couple, that way we can see all the sides. We see we have the top, east, south, west, north, and the bottom textures. So they all line up on the proper sides, and if we look into our menu, we can see that the directions do indeed line up the right way. So if I face this way, I'm facing west, and this side of the block is also west. So there we go. That creates textures that are specific to what side of the block you are on. Alright, so the next thing that we're going to take a look at is creating a block that has different textures based on the metadata that it's passed to. So I'm assuming you're familiar with metadata, but in Minecraft, blocks can have a metadata value between 0 and 15 that gives them 16 different options, and that can be used to store and return different things about that block. So, for example, wool in Minecraft, you may have noticed, all uses the same block. It all uses the wool block, but the different colors of wool are dependent on the metadata. So, say like if a wool block has a metadata value of 4, it may be blue, but if it has a metadata value of 8, it may be pink. Now obviously I don't know if those numbers are correct, it's just an example. So what we're going to do is we're going to create a block that comes back different colors for just a couple different metadata values. So we're going to start out like we did with the sided texture block by creating a new class for it. So new class, tutorial meta block. And then we want it to extend Minecraft block, Control-Shift-O to import. And then we need to add the constructor material. So now what we can do is just steal some of these attribute settings from our tutorial block. And there we go. We need to add the name. And we're ready to actually make our textures. So what I'm going to do is jump over to my image editor, and I'm just going to create a couple different colors. So make a couple different colors, nothing too fancy, just for demonstration. So say we have a black one, and we're going to save it. And the naming is going to be similar to the way we did our sided block. So we're going to name it tutorial meta block underscore and then the metadata value. So in this case, say we want to use metadata value 0 through 4, so for 5 different colors. I'm going to name this meta block 0, and I'm going to just repeat that for all the different colors that I want. So I'm just going to pick a bunch of different colors, save it 1 through 4, or 0 through 4. So similarly to what we did in our sided block class, we want to override the register block icons func method and create our textures interface variable to hold that. So the first thing we're going to do is create that variable. So public icon interface textures equals new icon 6. And then Control-Shift-O to import the icon interface. And then the next thing we need to do is override public void register block icons. This takes an icon register reg, Control-Shift-O to import icon register. And then in here, similarly to what we did in the sided block class, we need to have an iterating for loop that's going to go and get the textures for this block. So like we did up here, when this is registered, it's going to be something like tutorial meta block for our textures, like we named them over here, and then the underscore and then whatever metadata value. So it's going to go and find, say that since we only used 5 different sides instead of having the count go up to 6, we want it to go up to 5 because we're only allowing 5 different colors on this block. So it's going to go and it's going to go find all 5 of these textures and it's going to register them in this textures interface. Now this should feel pretty familiar by this point, but we need to override the getIcon method now. So public icon get icon int side int meta. And unsurprisingly, this time instead of returning the side texture, we're going to use meta to find the texture. So we're going to return this dot textures meta instead of side. But if you remember earlier, I mentioned that blocks can have a metadata value of between 0 and 15. And we only defined 5 different colors, 0 through 4. So what happens if that's past, say, the number 7? Well, it's going to throw an error and the game will crash, or the block texture won't work, or whatever. So we want to ensure that that doesn't happen. So what we need to do is we're just going to use a quick bit of logic up here to tell Java that if the meta value is greater than 5 or greater than 4, then we want to just automatically reset it to 0. So if meta is greater than 4, so if it's 0, it's okay. If it's 1, it's okay. If it's 2, it's okay. If it's 3, it's okay. If it's 4, it's fine. If it's greater than 4, so 5, 6, 7, 8, whatever, we want to automatically reset meta to 0. That will ensure that if this gets past a metadata of like 8, that it doesn't break the functionality of our block. Now, beyond just sided blocks, there are a couple additional methods we need to override and customize in here to ensure that our block behaves predictably in the game. So one of these is the damage dropped class. Now, method. What this method does is it tells Minecraft what the new metadata is based on the old metadata. So what it currently does in Minecraft is, say we had a meta block with a metadata of 3, so it was green. Well, if I break it, by default it's going to reset that metadata back to 0 and the block's going to turn black. But that's not what we want to happen. We want the color to stay the same when we break it. So we just need to override this public int damage dropped takes int old meta, and we just want to return the old meta. That way it maintains the color. So when I break a meta block with, number 3 green, when I break it, that way it stays green instead of defaulting back to 0. Now, the last thing we want to do is a bit of creative tab trickery. So as it stands now, by default, Minecraft only adds the default block to the creative menu. So if I were to go look in the MISC tab for this once we register it, I would only see the one with meta 0. I would only see the color black. But we don't want that to happen. We want to see all the colors, so we need to override a method, public void, and that's get sub blocks. This is called by Minecraft, among other things, when the creative tab is being populated, and it takes a couple arguments: item, creative tabs, tab, and a list. Then we can hold Control-Shift-O, import what we want. We want Minecraft item, and then just the default list. There we go. So what we're going to want to do is iterate through all the different possible metadata combinations, so 0 through 4, and register those in our list of blocks to go to the creative tab. So we're going to have another for loop for count equals 0, int count equals 0. Count is less than 5, and then count, we're going to iterate it each time. So this will repeat 5 times, 0 through 4. And then what we need to do is we're going to add each of these blocks to the list. So list.add, and we're going to add a new item stack of whatever item, in this case it'll be our meta block. How many? Well, we want 1. And then the next argument that you add to item stack is the metadata of that item. So we want to add count, since count is our metadata. So what this is going to do, Control-Shift-O to import item stack. So taking a look at this method in its entirety, what it does is it's going to take the argument for whatever item, whatever creative tab, and then the list of items to add to said creative tab. And what we are going to do is we're going to loop 5 times for the 5 different colors of our block, and we're going to add to that list 1 of each different color. And by creating a new item stack of item, we're going to add 1 of them, and then the count is our metadata, so 0 through 4. 0 being the metadata, of course, being the different color. So now that we've done that, we can jump back over to our TutMod Blocks class and register it like a normal block. So public static tutorial meta block, tutorial meta block for our variable. And down here we're going to just define the variable. Tutorial meta block equals new tutorial meta block material. I'm just going to go with rock again. And then the name, tutorial meta block. Save it, so there's our variable, and then we just register it in the game. Game registry.register block, tutorial meta block, tutorial meta block get unlocalized name. And there we go. So if we start up the game, it's going to go and register that block, and it's going to map all 5 different metadata versions of that block we should be able to use individually from the creative tab instead of just seeing the same one. So if we jump into our super flat world here, look in our MISC tab, and there we go. We see we have all 5 different colors. But one thing you may notice, there are a couple of issues with this still that we need to work out. If you look, they all have the same name, which may not be an immediate problem for you, but if you decide you want to name them different things, or if you want to make them completely different blocks just with the same metadata, that could be a problem. Another thing, the metadata 0 appears to work fine, but watch what happens when I try and place one without a metadata of 0. It also comes back as a metadata of 0. So by default, what's happening is when we place the block in the world, it's given metadata 0. The metadata is resetting. So there's still a couple more things we need to do, and we'll get to that real quick. So, what needs to happen? Well, the way Minecraft maps metadata between items, like blocks in your inventory, and blocks in the world, is using what's called an item block. And an item block is just that. It's the item version of a block. It's just how Minecraft remembers information about the block when it's placed in the world versus when it's an item, so when it's translated back and forth. So what we need to do is inside of our blocks package, we're going to create a new package, items. And then inside this items package, we're going to create a new class, item block tutorial meta block. And hit finish. Then it needs to extend item block with metadata. Extends item block with metadata, Control-Shift-O to import item block with metadata, hover over that to add the constructor. Now here's one thing we need to do. Rename the first argument to block and remove the second argument. Then change both of the arguments passed to super to block. So we're taking one argument, we're passing that one argument to both of the arguments for the super function. So that's the first problem. This will address making sure that the metadata is placed into the world. So when we place a blue block, it actually shows up as blue. And then the other thing we need to do is change the name. So that way when we have a blue block, we can name it blue versus if it's black. So what we need to do is override the getUnLocalizedName function. Well, the getUnLocalizedName function is also metadata aware because it's passed an item stack when it's called. Now, in things like this, in our just our raw class where there's no given item stack, then it's just given the default, which will be fine for our use case. So what we need to do is override getUnLocalizedName. So public string getUnLocalizedName takes item stack item. Control-Shift-O to import item stack. Now the next thing we need to do is change the name. So we want to get the default name. So this dot get unlocalized name, that's just going to get the normal unlocalized name. So what it would be now. So, like tile dot tutorial meta block. And then we need to make it specific to the metadata. So we're going to concatenate that with an underscore and then the metadata, which is referred to as the item damage. So stack dot, not stack, sorry, item dot get item damage. So what that's going to do is it'll return something like tile dot tutorial meta block underscore 3 or whatever. That way we can customize it to whatever metadata value that block has. So then in our lang file, what we can do is we can add specific names based on the metadata. So I'm just going to copy paste this and change the numbers. Yeah.
Did you want maybe scrambled eggs or fruit salad?
No, thank you. And then we can customize the name based on the color. So I've got black, yellow, blue, green, white. So black, yellow, blue, green, white. And there we go. So now what we can do is I can close all of these tabs I opened. And then in our, we need to change a couple things in our TootMod Blocks class. So the only thing we need to add is we're going to add another argument to the register block call for our meta block. So we're going to rewrite this line basically. So we're going to do game registry dot register block tutorial meta block for the first one. Then the second one needs to be the class of our item block. So item block tutorial meta block dot class. That'll automatically import it, comma, and then the unlocalized name. So tutorial meta block dot get unlocalized name. So what that's going to tell Minecraft is that we're going to register the meta block. Its item counterpart is in this class, so it'll know where to look, and then we're going to use whatever the unlocalized name we set up here. So now if we load up the game, it's going to know that we should associate this item with a specific metadata to the block. That way when we place it in the world, they've got different names, and they've got, like when you place it in the world, they hold their metadata. So if we jump back into our single player or super flat world, that is, we can see immediately if you look down at my items doc that the names changed, black, yellow, blue, green, white. So that's a good sign. And then if we place them into the world, you see that they actually hold their metadata when placed. So that's how you can use metadata to customize the texture of a block. And you could obviously combine the two things that we learned today, customizing the sided texture versus the metadata texture using this get icon. So you could say, if it's got a metadata of 1, return, this specific side color. So say we had a green one with a north on it. If it's got this other specific side, return a blue one with a north on it, whatever. So you could combine the two to create some really powerful, dynamic blocks just based on metadata. Alright guys, thanks for watching episode 6 in my Minecraft 1.7.10 modding tutorial. As usual, I'll be down in comments if you've got questions, issues, problems, or if you just want to connect, you can do it down there. Or on Twitter, my blog, via email. All links to do all that are down in the description below. Be sure to get subscribed so that you don't miss the next video in this series, as well as any of my other series on coding and software development and computer science. And as always, thanks for watching this video, and I will see you in the next one.